So I was going to shoot a quick video on my bone broth. I meant to film the bags before I put them in, but basically these are two more that I pulled out of the freezer. Those are chicken carcasses. I remember I mentioned to you how I'm getting a 40-pound box for $15. Yeah, so that's a lot of, that's maybe 1/50th of what's in that box. So typically what I do is I put them in these freezer bags, and I'll put 2 of chicken carcass, and then 1 bag about the same size of beef knuckle. And that's my consommé double, I guess you call that. And essentially that's what's going on here. I've been simmering this now for about 4 hours. I usually simmer for 8 hours. And then I don't reduce it at all. It's concentrated enough. I'll just strain it in the chinois. And once I strain, I put into an ice bath in my kitchen sink to kind of do a heat transfer. It'll cool down, you know, within 15 minutes, enough so I can put it in the fridge. Then the next morning I remove it, and then all that chicken fat and beef fat is on top. I skim all that off, and it's to the consistency of gelatin. It's really thick, but you'll see that as the video progresses. So now I've just turned it off. It's been simmering for 8.5 hours with the lid and about 20 minutes without the lid. And now I'll strain it into another pot about 2/3 the size of this one. And I'll kind of do the strain back and forth to make sure I filter out, you know, large sediment and things like that. And there's the other pot with the strainer. So with only one hand, it's kind of hard to spoon that around, but you get the idea. So after I strained that little bit in the beginning there, I came to my main pot and I removed the large bones, the beef bones, so they wouldn't damage my strainer. And there they are here. And the rest of the chicken bones is kind of, they've either disintegrated or they're small pieces. So, and there's of course some liquid in there still, so I'm gonna strain that next. So got our last bit of bones and particles there. I've got this figured out to the point where I fill that smaller vessel almost right to the top. And that's all my scraps there. And very little there. So there's a process. I think after the boil, after the simmer, this took me 10 minutes. Okay, all done. Got a bucket of bones there. And that's just going to be discarded once it cools down. It takes a long time to cool. So I just leave it on the counter with the lid, maybe overnight, and then in the morning I double bag it and dispose. Now we strain back and forth. I'll clean this out, and then I'll strain from the pot in the sink and this, maybe 3 times to filter it down. And there we go, from the smaller pot to the bigger pot, and then I'll go back to the smaller pot once more. You can see that sediment. So now I got my sink filled with water. I usually fill to about there, and I'll give it a good stir. You don't have to do that for long, just to move it. And the heat transfer happens pretty quick. I'll come back maybe 8 minutes, and it'll be warm still, the soup. And then I'll just drain the water and refill it with more ice cold water. I say ice, but it's just tap water, but it gets really cold. And I usually fill that sink 2 or 3 times until it's just the right temperature to put into the refrigerator. You don't want to drop your refrigerator temperature too much, because if you put that in too hot, that temperature will drop and you might have some food that'll spoil, because it could take a while for the fridge temperature to climb back down. Anyway, so here we are the next morning. I've had a good 10 hours in the refrigerator, and you can just basically see I'll have to skim this fat off. It's not that labor intensive. It takes perhaps 30 seconds to do that. And then I turn the element on low to liquefy this again, and then I pour it into containers and freeze. So there's a bit of a process, but it's really not that time consuming, and it's well worth it. I usually get I think 5 or 6 Tupperware containers out of here, and each Tupperware container has between 4 and 5 mugs, coffee mugs of broth. So now I've got my liquid gold ready to decant into these Tupperware containers. I got 6 of them here. And as I mentioned, there's usually 4 servings in each of these Tupperware, depending on the size of mug. I typically do this once a month, and I've been doing it now for at least 3 years. So there we go, as predicted, 6 Tupperware filled up. I always leave a little bit of room for expansion when it freezes. That's about all you need to leave. And then when I go to use this, I have a pot that'll accommodate 1 Tupperware. And I just take the frozen Tupperware to the sink, run a little bit of hot tap water over the base of the Tupperware, remove the lid, and then drop it into the pot. It usually slides right out, and then I'll unthaw that, and I'll get my 4 mugs worth out of there. So then I place it back in the fridge and just serve from the pot. That's kind of how I've done it. So yeah, as predicted, 6, but also a mug to spare, and that's exactly how it works out every time. Not sure if it's luck or just because I've done this so many times. So there we go, ready for the freezer. And the nice thing about these Tupperware, these containers, is they interlock the lids, they snap together, so you can stack them. I think in my freezer I usually go 3 high, depending on what I got in there. In the freezer. So now I'm going to enjoy a mug from my new batch of bone broth. I don't even season this. You know, this is just straight broth, nothing in it when I'm cooking it, when I'm simmering it. Not until I put it into a mug, then I only add a little pinch of Himalayan or sea salt. That's all I put in it. You might want to put, you know, poultry seasoning or, you know, flavor it up a bit, but I've just gotten used to having this just as natural as I can. So that's that. Oh, and this stuff is light years better than any of that crap you buy in the store. They have pre-packaged bone broth that comes in a jar or, you know, a drinking box. That stuff's garbage. I think I bought one once to try it, and it just tasted like a really watered down version of mine. But worse, because they had some weird flavorings going on there. So this is the way to go, au naturel.